All right, people, welcome to this episode of the Vision2Mission podcast. That's right, brand new, coming at you. Listen, today we have a friend of the podcast. We have Miss Jolene Smith of JS Realty up in Baltimore, Maryland. Welcome to the podcast, Jolene. How are you?
Thanks, Brenda, for having me. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm well. Thank you. So today we are diving right in. It's fall. And it's all about the housing market as far as we're concerned, right? So
Yes.
There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to go over. So I just want to pretty much dig right in. And for those who are listening to this podcast, if you want to learn more about Jolene and JS Realty, we'll have all the information for her in the show notes, and definitely check her out. She's a fantastic entrepreneur, fantastic realtor, fantastic business owner. So let's kind of dig right in. So, we're the two of us, we're in the DMV area, right? DC, Maryland, Virginia, general area. But I would definitely dare to say that where I am in Northern Virginia, the housing market here is definitely different from, let's say, Baltimore City and the different suburbs of Baltimore. I'm sure there's a lot of similarities, right? But there's definitely some differences. So really, let's just kind of start from where we are. Let's say from the end of the summer, because we're going to kind of go backwards in our time, okay? Let's say from the end of the summer, August timeframe through the present, the last couple of months. What have you noticed and what have you seen in the housing market?
I started to see a shift even before the rates changed, and I guess that's just the amount of buyers that were reaching out to me, because I primarily work with buyers as opposed to sellers. The number of buyers was a little bit decreasing, and I think that was just the looming. When the war on the Ukraine started, that's kind of when gas prices started to shoot up, and prices of the groceries and things everyday things started to go up, and people kind of reevaluated. Well, hey, let me see what happens here before we do anything.
Right.
Then when the rates started rising, and people's pre-approvals who I had been working with may have fallen, so. They were approved for $300,000, but with the new rates, they're now at $275,000. But the house prices weren't falling in the same manner. So they kind of put their, I'm going to wait until next year, or I'm going to renew my lease. Or I started to see that maybe, like you said, around August, September, maybe even a little before that. When they started to gradually get above that 5%, because we were spoiled for a couple years.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, because prior to COVID, we were in the 5s and the 6s. I mean, it wasn't abnormal to see, those rates, but the house prices have just exponentially increased that I think they're kind of waiting for those prices to fall. The people that I am working with, or trying to work with, I'm advising them that now it's not necessarily a buyer's market, but sellers are a little bit more flexible right now because it's either sitting longer on the market. I think the average day went from 12 days to over 30 now nationally. Right. But there are definitely some areas that are untouched. I'm sure, where you're at in the Northern Virginia, people will still need to move to that area for work, or even maybe they're moving out of the DC area to a less expensive Northern Virginia, Southern Maryland type of vibe, because they don't have to spend as much money to live close to where they work anymore if they work from home. So I do see a lot of that, but a lot of people are opting to rent, which that brings up another topic of high rental prices, but that's another subject for another day. But it's just Baltimore City is by far affected. I did take on 2 listings recently. Both are slow, actually 3, because one of my agents gave me one of her listings since she's out of state. And it's really, really slow, either no showings or maybe one sporadic showing here and there. So it's definitely affected Baltimore City. Different areas of Baltimore County are affected. As you know, one of my agents listed her house in Columbia, which is Howard County. And, that open house, I had about, 30 to 35 different families show up in a 2-hour period. And by the end of the weekend, in 48 hours, we had, I think, 5 or 6 offers. So, and she ended up getting, a significant amount over even what she was asking. So, there are certain areas that are untouched. By far, this market has not affected them. But Baltimore City, Baltimore, and areas of Baltimore County are definitely affected by the increase in the rates.
No, that makes a lot of sense, especially kind of where you are and, kind of moving back, kind of from the beginning of the year through the present. Let me even start last year. So, from reading different articles and listening to podcasts and reading stuff here and there and whatever, I think it was around October, November of last year. The Federal Reserve announced, hey, we're going to start to raise interest rates, and because inflation was even beginning to increase back then, and there was the reality of what was going on in the economy and what we were going to face. So my thought then was, okay, we're going to go, hey, people, be prepared. We're going to go from 2 point whatever to 4 point whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Or maybe 5. So be prepared. And so, I am definitely not a prophet, far from it, because it has gone from just when with one of my wholesale lenders, I'm able to download spreadsheets and see all of the metrics and all of the data on every single client that we've closed over a certain period of time. And I looked at all of the clients that we've closed from August of 2020 through October of 2022. And when I looked at 2020 and 2021, it averages out the interest rate, and the average interest rate was 2.875 of all the clients. And that's a lot, that we closed with this one particular lender. And it's but that's where the rates were. And, we're in the business of giving good deals. And you're right. I believe that everyone just believed, okay, this is where it is. This is where it's going to stay. This is our new norm, and we got spoiled. And so coming into this year, rates, I started noticing the difference definitely in February. And I think that's right around when everything also jumped off over in the Ukraine. And just incrementally, they've been going up. And today, if I were to take someone with let's say even a 700 FICO score, buying a single family house for $400,000 or $500,000 with 5% down, okay, their par, just normal level interest rate on the 30-year fixed, is definitely going to be somewhere between 6.875 and 7.25. It's going to fall somewhere within that range. That's where it is right now. And most likely when the federal,
if you were to say, hey, that's what it is, I really would like to do, something with the client to say, hey, look, you're marrying the house. That's what you're committed to with the house. But right now we're just dating the rate. So you're going to date this rate for 6 months. And in 6 months, we're going to try to see if we can find you another date. Because, we need to look, as long as the housing payment is affordable for you at this rate right now, all we can do is get you a better payment later, and a lesser payment later. So it's really just trying to shift their mindset from oh my gosh, to this isn't permanent. This can change. And even at this rate, you can afford this payment. So if we do lower your payment, but say the taxes go up a little bit, you'll still, it won't be a shock to the system.
No, you're right. This makes me think of two things. I think the first thing is that for people who are fairly savvy and understand the fact that, okay, rates do come in, ebbs and flows. It does come in waves. The economy goes through different seasons, right? Different cycles. It really does, for various reasons as you look throughout time. And so we're in a certain season right now. And I think, again, for those who are savvy and have a decent understanding of family finances, they can refinance at some point in the future, assuming, okay, their home value will go up a certain percentage because you have to have some equity there, right? And, depending upon how much the rates go down, so that you can actually have what's called a net tangible benefit. But when you said date the rate, it reminded me when I was in grad school. And then when I got out of grad school and I was single, and in our church we would just have like we would go on what's called dates, right? Just like kind of going out with the different sisters and stuff like that. Nothing serious. We would have fun, but I was broke, right? Broke. So I always did cheap dates. But let me tell you, my cheap dates were the funnest dates because me and some of my boys, we would lay out a blanket on the floor in the living room, and we'd have a picnic in the house, or we'd go to the Kennedy Center because every Friday night at 6 p.m. they had the like free shows for an hour, and we would go there and then go get some pizza and everything. I was definitely, a budgeteer.
Creative. Creative
Say
on a
again?
budget. Creative on a budget.
Well, here's the thing. But there's a relation here because going out on the date, in my opinion, was not so much about how much money I spent. It was about the quality of the time, right? Are we going to laugh? Are we going to be safe? Are we going to have a good time? And I think that really, if you kind of look at it in terms of like someone in a home, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you going to be able to build family memories in that new home? Are you going to be in a safer neighborhood? Are you going to have a better commute? Are you going to have better amenities in schools and stores and things of that nature, right? And again, are you forward thinking, realizing, okay, which leads me to my next point, like, because you and I think very similarly in terms of when I talk to clients today and they're intimidated by the rate, I encourage them not so much to look at the rate, but to look at their budget, right? It's all about what can you afford per month. So if someone says to me, well, our budget is $2,500 to $2,800 a month on a mortgage max, then we just go to the Excel spreadsheet and we just reverse engineer it. And then I come out with a number and I say, okay, based on, a 3.5% or a 5% down payment or a 3% down payment, this is your purchase price, right? We do this all the time. This is what your estimated taxes are, your estimated homeowners insurance. And so the key, I think, in all of that, Jolene, is the amount that people qualify for definitely in terms of their budget has decreased significantly, probably by 100K, honestly, for what they want. So how have you, being a realtor and talking to people who want to live in a certain area, right? They have an idea of what they want generally. How have you been able to adapt and adjust to that reality that we're facing now and still meeting their needs?
That's obviously difficult. Because as much as the rates are going up and as much as their pre-approval amounts have decreased, the prices of the houses, they're coming down, but not as significantly as what they've been approved for. So it's either like shifting their mindset about what they want, like if they wanted a detached house versus a townhouse, or a certain area in the city versus a certain area in the county. It's really finding out what they're comfortable moving forward with, or like, unfortunately, most of them, or, fortunately for them, because they're thinking long term, is they've just put it on pause. And it's just a matter of, looking to see, and they're still actively being sent properties. So it's not like they're, not being contacted, or they're not being, like seeing what's out there. And I think if they found something that really piqued their interest, then they would jump. And then just letting them know that at this point, as opposed to even just a year ago, at this time, if, we have a little bit more flexibility with the seller. So if you see something you like, maybe go a little bit over what you can, your budget is, and then we can kind of negotiate some things where we couldn't do that a year or two ago. It was, this is the sales price, and if you aren't going to offer more and not ask for any help, or, all the no contingencies type of transaction, we're not there anymore. Even on the higher priced homes, we're not there anymore. So I think it's just trying to manage expectations, and then, make sure that they're comfortable moving forward. Because we've certainly dealt with people who, through the transaction, they start to get a little freaked out. They see numbers, they see how much they need, they see how much is on the piece of paper, as opposed to knowing that that's a fluid something, just managing those expectations and making sure that, me as the realtor, I'm guiding them the right direction when it comes to buying a house. Because, you and I both work with a lot of first-time home buyers. So they don't have any reference point. They've never looked at houses before. They probably didn't pay any attention to what mortgage rates were 2 years ago, let alone 5 years ago, or don't know that that could change in the future. I think I saw something, a gentleman was on he was like, yeah, we really want to move, but we can't even, if we sold our house, we couldn't even afford our house if we had wanted to rebuy it. So,
Wow. Wow.
so if you can't even afford, if you want, like, say, a bigger house and you can't even afford the smaller house you live in, if it was for sale for what you could sell it for, then that's where the problem lies. It's like you can't really, people who want to, get bigger because their family's getting bigger, that's where the limitations are. And then say people who, I need to downsize because I don't need as much space, or, now it's a single income household as opposed to a dual income household. You're trying to go smaller, but it's the same price. So it's like, do we weather this storm for a little bit? What can we do to help the client navigate, do I move now? Do I move 3 months from now? Like, as you see, things can change quickly. So it's not like they say, yes, the rate's going to continue to go up, or we don't know when it's going to change. And that's even when I'm listing a property, when I run comps, I don't even run it based off of what's sold anymore. I run it based off of what's on the market right now. How are we priced against the other properties that are currently for sale in the neighborhood that are still on the market? Because that's your competition now, as opposed to what sold 30 days ago or 60 days ago, because that was a different market. Even just 30 days ago, even just 2 weeks ago was a whole different market, because that person went under contract 30 to 45 days before that. So, and their rate could have been in the 4s or lower 5s. And now we're talking about 6s and 7s. So it's just managing the client's expectation, both buyer and seller.
No, you make a great point. I was talking to a good friend of mine yesterday. He's looking to purchase a home in Florida, and he's looking at new construction. And he sent me a link to the builder's website. And he's like, hey, look, they're offering a 4.99 rate. I was like, no, they're not. I was like, I just don't believe that. So he sent me the link, right? So I go to the link and, kind of navigate and then find about financing. And it does say right there, boom, find out about our 4.99% 30-year fixed deals. So I'm like, okay, so let me read the small print, right? Yeah. And to your point, the small print says, rate and APR are based upon rates as of September 20th. And it had some other terms and conditions in there. So I'm like, that was a month ago. But he rates were even higher. Furthermore, we had the phone number to the finance guy. Great guy. I called the finance guy. Here's the kicker. And this is what I told him. I was like, look, this stuff is not just given away for free. It's not how the market is. When you buy new construction, like, they give you like these incentives, right? Mm-hmm. Quote, air quotes, incentives that they build into the price of the house. Builders. You don't give away anything for free. I said it. Anyway, so they give you these incentives. And he was like, oh, yeah, we give away a 5% incentive, which you can use maybe toward, a finished basement, a patio, this, any other. But he said for the 4.99 rate, we normally use the full 5% incentive. I said, that's what I thought.
Yeah,
exactly. And that's a big number, and it's about right. It's about right. So when I got off the phone with the guy, I thanked him, and I was talking to my friend. I said, yeah, that's not for free. I said, I was like, whenever you see something that's advertised, you have to look at the terms and conditions, right? Because that's the carrot that a lot of places will dangle in order to kind of get you hooked in, and so it's important to have someone like you or like me to kind of read it and get an understanding of what's what.
Right, because that's a language to them. Like,
absolutely it is.
And 5% and what it goes towards. Mm-hmm. Like, if they've never done that type of transaction, it's like learning, Spanish for the first time. Like, you're reading it, but you're not comprehending it. So it's having one of us to step in and say, hey, help me out with this, and just figuring out what their next step should be. And, I've been in situations where, I've had to not necessarily let the client go, but let them kind of decide on their own, because it's, if I'm not the right fit, or like their lender at the time wasn't the right fit, or if they did want to use the lender for the builder, okay. And then usually at the end of that is when they're like, oh, well, I thought this was happening and I thought that was happening, you know, and because, you know, the builders finance people, they're not going to explain it as detailed as you or I would. And
Mm-hmm.
I try to stay in my lane when it comes to if I'm the realtor or if I'm in the mortgage side of the transaction. Because
Right.
if I overstep something, especially if I'm not working directly with the builder's lender, then they could come back and say, oh, well, my realtor said this or did that, or, you know, and it's not my place to be the educator for the mortgage side if I'm the realtor. And oftentimes they speak to their lender outside of me, and then I don't know what's said between them, especially when they
Mm-hmm.
start adding things to the property and don't realize that that costs money. Like, let
Right.
me add this light fixture for $800, and that's going to increase my payment per month. You know, so you're financing an $800 light fixture over 30 years. But
Yeah.
it's like when I worked in the car industry, I learned from the guys that sold cars, never finance your car mats. So like if they're adding things to your car, like adding a spoiler or adding floor mats or like little stuff that you can you can pay for and do it on your own or get it done after you buy it. Because you're financing $60 floor mats for a 5-year term at 14% interest. So
That's a good point.
paid, you know, $700 for $60 floor mats. So same thing comes with like new build. It's just primarily new build because in previously owned homes, it's not the same. But new build, you know, yes, you want some electrical ran to that area, but you don't need to add the light fixture. So, but the little things like that are things that we know as realtors and mortgage people, but oftentimes the two are separate. So, and we're not usually included in a lot of the new build stuff when it comes to the realtor.
So, but
side.
do you think people like when it comes to a new build, do you think they pay for the convenience though of that, just having it done? Like when they walk in, it's like it's all there.
They do, but you have to explain it to them. So, like you said, say there is an incentive, and they do use it to pay the rate down, but they still want that deck. So they're going to spend $10,000 or now $15,000 on a new deck built by the builder, but they're adding that into the cost of their home. So most people don't own the home for 30 years, so it's different. You know, like
Right.
you're only going to own it for 5 to 7 to 10 years. Great, but you're still paying interest for 5 to 10 years on a $10,000 deck. You could just go either save up your money and pay cash for with no interest, or you can finance it with an outside company for a shorter period of time and pay less money. So it's really
Right.
just a mind thought, like, okay, do you want your monthly payment to increase, especially if they're on a tight budget? It's like, is that really necessarily part of like living in this house? So I know a lot of people
No, absolutely.
love it. A lot of people love
And
it.
so
I've had one for 2 years and never sat on it. So
really.
but it came with my house, so I didn't build it.
Believe me, I completely understand. It just kind of reminds me when I first moved into my development. Wow, it's been 8 years. It's like it's crazy. But when I first moved, I think it was between my first year and second year. There was there's a whole bunch of vendors would be coming by for patios and decks and this and that and the other. And I had a really valuable experience one time. A guy came. He was at my house for almost 2 hours. Again, that's all my fault. That's all on me. So he wanted So what happened was this. So my house is not like above the ground. It's like right when you walk out the back. It's right there. So yeah, you have some small steps. But anyway, I was thinking I wanted either a patio or maybe a deck. But when I was looking at the deck, they were offering the Trex, I guess that's called, right? The composite. But it wouldn't be that far above the ground. I mean, maybe 6 to 12 inches or something like that. It wouldn't be right on there. And we went out, we did the dimensions and all this and the other. I still have the estimate. I kept it. When I tell you, it was a decent size, not gigantic, for a decent size Trex deck patio kind of mix, they wanted to charge me $32,000. And when I looked at that, I coughed like you did. I kept that estimate. And I said, $32,000. And what I actually did was I went to Home Depot a couple of weeks later. Home Depot has like this kiosk place where you can actually build online like a deck. And it will show you, it will break down. It's an amazing piece of software. It will break down all of the costs of the nuts, bolts, and this and that and the other. And I actually did it. I printed it out, scanned it, and I sent it to them because it was like 1/6 of the cost, 1/7. So I was like, you mean to tell me you guys are charging me like $23,000 in labor costs? And I'm like, look, your man Jose is getting paid a lot of money, but he's not going to get paid $23,000 to build this deck. So I was completely turned off by that but there were other people that got caught up in that. And because maybe they just figured, they would do the financing. Oh, you only have to pay $300 and some a month for this and the other. But to me, it was far from worth it. I ended up getting a stamped concrete patio, which is really nice. Lasts, you have to kind of do the maintenance, but for a small fraction of that cost, And so it just kind of reminds me because there's a new construction right across the street from where we live, and people just have paid extraordinary amounts of money just to have stuff done as soon as they walk in, and I'm trying to get it. Say again?
They're paying for that convenience. Like, it's just convenient, and, it's a shorter time period, and then you made the mistake of letting him probably walk around your house so he could see, he built this brand new house. He must have money. So
yeah, that was a mistake. It really was. We sat down and talked forever, and it was a lesson learned.
Yeah. And I remember I had a client buy a new build out here in Randallstown, and I gave her my contractor's information, and he gave her a quote to put it's a deck that spans the whole back of her house, but it, like you said, it's right off of the house. So it was only like 3 steps down, but she wanted it to span out and then have like the steps that go all the way around all the sides. So no railings, just open. And he gave her a price. My opinion, it was a great price. And she got some advice that told her, you need to shop this around, like you need other prices, basically skeptical about what my contractor at the time could do. And I guess maybe like 6 months later, she took his written estimate over to Lowe's, and the guy at Lowe's knows me personally. And he called me up later. He was like, yeah, you had a client come in, because my name was at the top because I got the estimate for her. And he was like, you gave her an estimate for a deck. He was like, well, you better call that guy because we can't honor that price. Like, it was way cheaper than Lowe's would have ever done for her. And Lowe's isn't like super expensive. They're more expensive than like your average Joe maybe, but then they're not the most expensive either. So, of course, she got it done. I don't know who she got it done by, but it wasn't mine, but I don't think it was Lowe's either. But, she also waited a long time. And as you know, lumber prices ended up skyrocketing. And, I got an estimate for my house for a privacy fence, and I have a really big backyard. The material alone in early 2020 was like $5,800. Just the material, just the panels and the posts, not even the labor. And that same amount of panels and posts is probably closer to $12,000, and it was $5,800 before.
Right. Wow.
So I was like, man, I should have just bought it, but it's okay. Right. I'll wait then, because for me, it's not, it's not something I need to live in the house. I would like it. Right. It's not a necessity. So we do have to have those conversations with some of our buyers. Is like, what's really a necessity? What is a a must-have in your home or area? And I understand everybody wants a safe area. Unfortunately, I don't think there's such a thing anymore. You're going to have crime no matter where you're at. But you could live in a gated community and still have crime. So, and let's put it this way. You may not deal with as much crime in a gated community, but you'll deal with other things in a gated community. Yes,
absolutely, you will.
There's other issues in those type of communities that you're still going to deal with. So it's weighing those factors of nowhere's going to be perfect. It's where you want you and your family to be. And, obviously schools are important for people with children, and whether they're going to be able to walk to school or get to school, or whether that school has a good score, or, I have a couple clients who really, or they want to keep them in a certain county because they want their child to go to certain schools. That's fine, but it just limits our opportunities to find them something within their budget. So, I foresee that the rise in the rates is going to bring some of those for sale home prices. I have seen a rise in foreclosures, which is going to help boost some of the affordability, I think, of homes, as long as the banks are reasonable about what they're going to sell the foreclosures for.
Right.
I hope they're not basing it off of 6 month ago prices, because that's going to pose a problem for investors to buy these homes and fix them up and be able to sell them, because they're not going to be able to. So we'll see. I mean,
right.
I'm dealing a lot more with people who are picking up properties to hold as opposed to sell. So,
Got it.
But I get a mixture of calls on both ends.
Well, but that actually transitions us to the other thing that I wanted to talk about, because so far we've been talking about owner-occupied properties.
Correct.
Right. So kind of expand upon or add on to what you've been kind of sharing with regards to investors, because generally, I think you have two different types of investors. You got experienced ones, and you got non-experienced ones, right? And so they have, very different views, and sometimes very different objectives. Yeah. So what have you seen from the newer ones and the more experienced ones on how they are, how are they facing and how are they processing what's going on in the market today?
So the newer ones are, I won't say they're oblivious to the rates and what that means for an investment, especially if it's like a buy and hold.
Right.
So I try to explain to them, like, 2 years ago, if you would have bought a home and kept it and renovated it and refinanced it and put a tenant in there, your cash flow would have been this much based off of the rate. Because your rate's always going to be higher as an investor than it would, but than how you bought your home now, your current home.
Right.
So, your cash flow could have been $500. So now they're 7, 8, some up to even 10% for investors.
Yep.
So your cash flow is now going to be 200 or 250 or something of that nature. So your mortgage is still 100% paid by somebody for that particular property. As long as it's rented and the tenant is paying, your rent is at least paid, and you're earning a little bit of money that, still is taxable. So remember that. Like, you still are going to be taxed on whatever money you make on those properties, but it's just going to be less than it was a couple years ago. But you're not married to that rate either. Like, eventually these rates are going to come down, or there's going to be an opportunity for you to refinance these properties, and you can refinance and get a lower rate, and your cash flow will increase, and right. You'll still have somebody paying the mortgage. Now it'll just be a smaller mortgage and more of a profit on this end. So it's like a long-term, like, money every month, where I'm still getting people who want to flip. Obviously, the inventory is not that great right now, but I foresee that it's going to happen soon. It's just a matter of what the banks are going to try to sell the properties for. Banks are not in the business of real estate. Banks are in the business of collecting money from people and making money off of the money they collect from people. So when they go to sell these properties and they have brokers, price opinions done, BPOs done, we're obligated to give them the last 6 month screenshot of what that property would have sold for in the last 6 months based off of condition, location. But 6 months ago, that same house probably sold for, as is, $200,000 or $300,000. So, but in today's market, we need to factor in maybe the last 30 days or what's currently on the market that's similar to the property. But I don't think banks know that. They don't have anybody internally that advises them that this is not the way we should be valuing the asset. Like, they're gonna write the loss off, foreclose on the property, and then they need to sell it to recoup some of those funds. But it's still not going to be as much as maybe what they write off, but they still get to write off the loss. So hopefully the banks will internally get somebody in on their staff or, or a professional, because it's not like if they asked me to go run a broker's price opinion that I could tell them this. Like this is just the way they want it done, and you're going to do it that way. Then
No,
an agent's
absolutely.
gonna put it on the market at whatever price the bank wants it to sit on the market. Of course,
No,
you can.
and I agree.
So, like, if it's
Yeah.
on the market for 300,000, you're like, well, no, I'm going to offer you 150. It's up to the bank to say no. But I think once they start getting repetitive offers for things like that, then you definitely could. I think you definitely could justify to the bank, if you're the listing agent, to say, hey, look, this is really what it needs to be priced for.
And I agree 100%. And Anton's about to bring up this article from the USA Today. But, from my experience, even from 15 years ago, like we kind of had the housing crash, and there were so many short sales, right? They were taking place in a lot of foreclosures. These places have asset managers, and the asset manager, you would think, would be able to again, look at a BPO and have a realistic perspective in terms of what that property, would sell for. And I think what happened in the past, which is what I don't want to happen now, but there were so many foreclosures and there were so many short sales, right? That I think you remember, like, if someone wanted to buy a short sale, it could have took anywhere from 3 to 7 months or more for that to be fully processed and go through, just simply because of the volume,
Right.
And I'm really hoping that doesn't occur. But, there's this article in the USA Today that just talks about how the housing shortage, is awful and is likely to get worse with no apparent end in sight. And I wrote down a couple of key points from that. So the first is this, you kind of talked about housing prices. So it had the U.S. average housing price in 2021 was $355,000, more or less. And this is as of September of 2021. And as of September this year, the average again across the country was 800. So there's like a little bit over 8%, increase. And the funny thing is, I really think even those numbers are probably supported by I would probably say 4 states. 4, probably like Virginia. Well, 5, probably like you have DC, kind of Virginia, California, Florida, and probably parts of New York City. Like it's just a few areas that the prices are so high mathematically, it's bringing up everything else. And I think there's a housing shortage, air quotes, of millions of homes. And so, what have you seen that's going on up in the, kind of in the Maryland area, the Baltimore and surrounding areas? Have you seen a lot of new construction potentially, or what are your thoughts with regards to as you look into 2023, what could potentially happen when you have the combination of higher interest rates and lower inventory?
So we don't really have any low inventory, at least not in my area. I follow my particular area, Owings Mills. Like, I send myself emails about what's going on the market and what's been sold. And at one point, I think there were like 10 active listings in Owings Mills at one point, and now there's like 90 something. So yeah, it's all the gamut. It's condo, it's townhouse, it's single family, it's high, it's low. So it's a lot. And then I don't get that many solds. And like what happens is when it's switched to closed, I get the email saying that property is closed in your area, in the Owings Mills area. So I try to keep up with like my geographical farming area, just so I know what's happening in and around me. But in the city, like, there's tons of inventory, tons. It's really just right now about price. So you're competing with me now in the city and even in the county somewhat. So it's just it's really just about timing and area. So, that's the same prior to COVID, prior to the rate, like those decrease in the interest rates. When I worked with a buyer and or a seller, it was looking at what area we were in, looking at what was available, and then just on the seller side, marketing it based off of like, a lot of my investors aren't emotionally attached to the property, but if they were, it's managing, like, I know you think your house is worth this much money, but this is what's, I always like to look at what's actually active. I don't care what's under market, because that person could have already had a buyer ahead of time, or, or it's like it's right next door to their grandmother's house, or, there's certain aspects we don't know about the transaction until it actually closes. So it's a matter of just like, let's see what you're competing against. And then on the buyer side, it's like, okay, well, we have, 5 properties in this one neighborhood that you really like. None of them are going to be everything you absolutely want on your list. There's no such thing as a perfect house. Even if you build one, the house is not going to be perfect. Unless you just have unlimited funds, unless I win this lottery on Saturday of $800 million or more, because by the time it gets to Saturday, I'll probably be more, then I can build my perfect home. But, that would take probably 2 or 3 years for it to get built, right? Like, building doesn't happen in a short, it took 6 months to renovate my little tiny house. And, even though it's supposed to take 6 to 8 weeks. So 5 months later,
right.
8-week renovation was finished. And that's just a renovation. That wasn't even like, building it from the ground up and pulling permits. So, there's no such thing as a perfect house. So it's like, what we need to, there are areas where there is a shortage. Speaking just from like another aspect is my parents live in Texas, and they live in a pretty like desired city. It's called McKinney. And their realtor, who sold 2 of their rental properties recently, one last year, one this year, he called them desperately saying, hey, do you know anybody who's selling or going to sell or wants to sell a property in McKinney? I have a buyer who desperately needs to move here. And there's nothing, 0 inventory, nothing for sale. And the problem with the last 2 years in McKinney is people were buying the houses with cash, no appraisal, no home inspection. It was significantly over really what it would appraise for, because they were from out of state. So we had a lot of California buyers coming into Texas who had tons of equity because they sold their home, their $400,000 home that they bought in the 80s and the 90s is now worth $1.5 million, and they're moving to Texas and buying, a house that's probably twice the size as the one in California, but they're only spending $350,000, $400,000, so they're going to pay cash for it. So, not realizing that property taxes in Texas are much greater than California, but it's that there's pockets of areas where there's just 0 inventory. So it's really, the people who need to live in McKinney might need to find an alternative. Like, let's look at Allen. Let's look at Melissa. Let's look at the different areas around and just accommodate. Otherwise, you're going to end up renting, because there are still some rentals available. But it's, it's not a good place to put your money is in a rental, unless you own the rental, and then it's a great place to put your money.
Right. No, and that makes perfect sense. And it's funny, I just read an article the other day. It was said, Zillow had laid off another 300 people, because they had become an iBuyer, and so, I definitely, for those who are listening to this, I definitely encourage you to Google iBuyer and what that means and kind of the effect that has had on the market. But I think over the course of this year, Zillow has laid off a lot of people generally, right? We had Redfin laying off people. Remax at one point had laid off 17% of its workforce. We've had different lenders, wholesale lenders, go out of business altogether. And I think it's a shame and it's sad, because those are real people, who need real money from real jobs, right? But I think at the same time, it's definitely symptomatic of the excess that we had over the past couple of years. And the thought process, I guess, from a business perspective, that, well, the good times are going to continue to roll, right? We can just kind of come and do what we want to do and hire as many people as we want to hire. You know, and kind of on a side note, I was listening to another newscast or something and just talking about, like, for example, they're looking at, you know, paring down even Facebook. I think Facebook by itself has 85,000 employees.
Jeez.
Imagine, like 85,000. You know, it's like, what are they doing? And like, even with your man, Elon Musk, he's going to come in and buy Twitter, and word on the street is that he's going to cut the workforce in half, right? Because he's a businessman. He's realizing how much fat, you know, is on that piece of brisket. It's like, I got to get that off, you know, because he needs to run the company more lean. And I think that there's a correction that's very similar, right? That's taking place, you know, within the economy, because really the fat, if you want to look at it, is the inflation that's been taking place. And so we have to kind of take some austerity measures economically to kind of get that cut out. But, you know, but it hurts us.
Yes.
In the real estate field, you know. Yes. So, you know, as we prepare to end off here, what are some of the things that you're doing as an entrepreneur, as an individual realtor, as a broker, right? Who has a team under you? What are some things that you're doing for yourself, and how are you preparing your team as you head into next year?
So I've actually just attended a brokers conference in Orlando that was put together by a Facebook group that I'm in. And it was just a bunch of independent brokers. So, you know, no EXPs or Kellers or, you know, all the other big brokerages. We're just all smaller independent ones throughout the country, a couple from Georgia, Michigan, Florida, Kentucky, where else? Arkansas, New York. And we all just had like it was just a big mastermind. Like, we talked about backend systems, CRMs, SEOs, and to me, even though I just celebrated my 6 years in being a broker for JS Realty.
Congratulations.
6 years ago yesterday, you know, my little broker story started. And thank you. And we talked about that foreign language thing for clients who are reading like about interest rates or buying a house, or all of this is brand new. And even though I've been a broker for 6 years, half the stuff they were saying was a foreign language to me, because they are operating from being with bigger brokers and having that experience and coming from like a team setting to where they basically were running their own business, but underneath someone else's umbrella, where they were like, I'm getting rid of that umbrella and I'm creating my own. So it was probably the most informative day and a half, because I had to leave a little early, that I've ever had. So, you know, I'm transitioning from I was so proud of myself saying, oh, all of my business is referral and I don't have to do any advertising and I don't pay for leads. And, you know, I'm slowly transitioning to where that's a small mindset. You know, for me, that was just for me. I was thinking for me, but I have 8 agents that work underneath my license and that hang their license on my wall. How can I help them grow? So, it's, you know, I think for the first 6 years I was just I have to make this work so I can feed myself. So now that I'm comfortable with what I've done and how I've grown my business and how it is steady for me, I would like to be able to help grow other people that want to come work with me. So I think what I've been I transitioned when I saw the slowdown happen to do some more property management for clients, which has helped me out exponentially as far as stability. But now I have the ability to use some of that excess time that I have to help grow the business in a different direction, maybe bring on some more experienced and producing agents, and you know, work on growing the business, because there's still business to be had. People are still moving. People are still buying houses. People are still selling houses.
Absolutely.
So, you know, it's tapping into that, utilizing the same customer service experience I give to the reason I get referrals is because of the customer experience that people have with me.
Right.
And the personal relationships I carry over after the transaction closes. I met you through a client and he bought a house less than 2 years later, another house less than 2 years later.
Right.
And so just staying in that person's life, not on I'm not always advertised basis, but like checking in as more of like a friendship level or at least a relationship. There's a relationship between myself and my clients. Most of them follow me on Facebook. Most of them get a card from me, or all of them get a card from me twice a year. So it's keeping up those same standards, but transitioning it to where it's going to help my agents grow. So that's really what I want to focus on, is making that customer centered focus into the whole business as opposed to just coming from me. Which I think
that's fantastic.
Do a great job, but it's like, how can I help them grow their business?
Right. And I really feel like, for people out there, and if you operate a small business, meaning I'm going to go ahead and say like, 20 or 30, employees, or associates or less. And especially if you're in a service field, right? Because we offer a service to our clients, and the product is the actual real estate. But I think this is really important, because there's a huge difference between us focusing on ourselves and our own personal growth and development, which I think is important first, because if not, we're not filling ourselves up. We have nothing to give, right? So you're investing in yourself, for example, by going to Florida or, doing different things, but then it enables you to gives you some perspective, right? It gives you some of that inspiration, that information that you need to then help your associates grow, your realtors, your people under you, to grow for themselves. And of course, not only does that help the businesses, top line and hopefully bottom line, but it really is like the branches of a tree. And and you want to, really create a beautiful, flourishing tree of a business where people, hopefully, you don't have a lot of attrition, right? And there's a great culture of morale in the company. Go ahead.
Yeah. There's one other agent said it's okay to have attrition. Like, that's part of growing, because not everybody is going to align with your goal and mission. And you also don't want to hold anybody back either. Just like they may, and I have left bigger brokerages to do our own thing. I never felt like the people I worked with or under, like, really felt like I had to stay there or I couldn't do it on my own. In fact, I credit Sherry Harris from Keller Williams to my success, because she really sat me down at one point in my life and said, look at what you're doing over here. You could be doing this for yourself. You're
absolutely.
doing this for somebody else. You're helping someone else build a business. Come over here and build your own. Of course, she probably would have loved for me to build it under her for a while, which, I guess I could have, but it took me a couple of years, even after that conversation, to make it to where to starting my own thing. So, it wasn't an instant like, oh yeah, okay. And then I did it the next day. It took me a good 2 or 3 years after that to decide to move on and do my own thing, be it brokerage or property management or, just letting go of that past business relationship. So, it definitely, attrition is okay. It's okay to lose people, because you never want to, you want to impact people's lives to where they feel like they can grow as well.
Well, I would agree with that. And I think the other half of that also is like even pruning, like when you prune like a rose or a plant, right? You enable it to grow back even better. And so sometimes you're right. We as business owners, we need that in some form of fashion, for all of us to be healthy. And I think it is a blessing, as you've mentioned, right? That you can kind of be that vehicle for someone, that launching board, or, that launching pad for them to kind of go on and do bigger and better things. So I agree with you in that aspect 100%.
Right.
And this is an interesting time. It's a very interesting time to be in the business. And I think for people to get in the business, generally, I don't necessarily think any time necessarily is a bad or horrendous time. I think it's about your perspective, right? and really having some good guidance and maybe a good team around you, and being able to adapt and adjust as we've talked about for the last hour. So, yeah, I'm curious and I'm excited to see what the next year holds. But we have, like you saying, we have to prepare.
Yeah, this is where,
and we've got to put our work in.
This is where hustlers stand out. People who,
that's right.
Anyone who got into the business in the last 2 years, either mortgage or real estate, really has never experienced adversity in the real estate market. And, some of them weren't even old enough to be in real estate in 2008. So when the housing market crashed, or they weren't in the business or weren't even thinking about real estate at the time. So I think it's really just about, knowing that this is your purpose, like this is what you're called to do, and making it work for you even during the rough times. So, fortunate that I've met you, because this is definitely your calling, and I definitely feel like this is mine. So it's really just aligning ourselves with the similar mindsets to motivate during the lower periods. So the lower periods of time,
absolutely,
definitely, test your faith in what you feel like you're supposed to be doing.
Yep. There we go. I think that's a great way to end off. And so you said the word hustler. So I'm going to give a shout out. Go to YouTube, check out Motiversity, Hustler's Mindset. It's great gym motivation. I listen to it all the time. So with that said, Jolene, thank you so much for being on the Vision2Mission podcast. You are definitely a diamond in the rough up there in terms of just, you shine bright in a dim economy. And I think for people who are looking to purchase a home up in the Maryland area, or even down closer to DC, if you're even considering refinancing for whatever strange reason, or if you want to put your house on the market, whatever, definitely reach out to Jolene. As you've heard over this podcast, she's a wealth of knowledge. She cares about her clients, and she'll care about you as well. So thank you all for listening to this episode of the Vision2Mission podcast. Love you all. Take care, and God bless.